In a world that is ever-changing, what changes in the world will have the greatest impact on trade and goods movement in the United States? And for that matter, how will these changes affect the economy of the nation, the West Coast, and Southern California? As with most discussions about the world economy and trade, the conversation begins in China. What will happen as the nation supporting the largest population and now incurring the greatest use of world energy supplies continues to expand and evolve? Many economists now believe China will emerge as the world's biggest economy by 2019. What are the repercussions of China becoming number one in gross domestic product? A few trends in this area are becoming apparent. First, China's wage scale will continue to rise, making production costs increase compared to other low-cost labor sources, such as neighbors Vietnam and Cambodia. The chase for the cheapest labor in manufacturing will continue. China already has surpassed Mexico in terms of average annual wages. In 2013, China's average monthly wages were 50% higher than Mexico's. This trend could result in some manufacturing spreading to other parts of the world, including South Asia, South America, and parts of Africa. Closer to the West Coast, the recent pay scale increases in China may rekindle some of the dynamism of the maquiladora manufacturing system in Mexico. As factories ramp up south of the U.S. border, opportunities for near-sourcing supplier services could lead to a restructuring of the production process, facilitated by geographic land access to the United States.
Historically, labor has always been moving, whether it was from England to New England and New England to the South and South to other parts of the world, and certainly the countries that we're talking about. Central America, South America, Central Asia, Africa, those are all going to be areas of the world that there's a lot of room for development. All of the countries that are countries that are seeking to build wealth are going to have to start out somewhere, and they usually start that with labor-intense industries.
A second trend in China is the maturation of the internal consumer market. As China's workers acquire more disposable income and savings become available for spending, the distribution of goods will focus more on supplying the domestic Chinese market. The end result will be fewer goods leaving China for export purposes. Chinese leaders understand the need to balance their economy with more internal consumption and less reliance on export revenue to support sustainable growth. A third trend coming out of China is a series of plans to increase the value-added aspect of productivity. In order to accommodate rising wages and compete with other nations at the upper rungs of the economic ladder, China realizes it must emphasize innovation and engineering, along with creativity and upscale services. The phrase that permeates the halls of strategic planners in China today is, "Products must be innovated in China, not just made in China." This means products and services must include higher levels of locally created artificial intelligence, software capability, and remote interconnectivity. Related concerns about intellectual property rights also will need to be resolved.
If I was in China in a planning capacity, I'd be looking to not only continue growth from an export perspective, but serve that emerging middle class. Some of the figures that I've read, for example, is that people that have risen from the poverty level into middle class is equal to the entire population of the United States. So you have to be in a position to educate that middle class and help to make them be more innovative, but also serve that market with the products and services that traditionally have been exported from China. But I think it has a lot to do with training and education and elevating the games of individual people so that sectors and regions of the country and ultimately the whole country remains competitive moving forward.
A fourth issue in China that must be addressed is the overabundance of pollution caused by rapid, unchecked factory growth and the largely unregulated use of oil and coal and industrial chemicals. According to World Health Organization guidelines, several of the most polluted cities in the world are located in China. The dark cloud of air pollution over major cities such as Shanghai and Beijing is derisively termed airpocalypse by many local residents. Environmental hazards in China serve as an ominous cautionary warning for other rapidly industrializing nations, including India, which is suffering from similar pollution problems. In Southern California, the San Pedro Bay has been successful in combating many of the environmental problems associated with rapid growth and massive goods movement operations. Clean truck initiatives, adherence to rigorous air quality standards and regulations, and efforts like Pier Pass to minimize congestion have significantly reduced the impact of diesel exhaust in the harbor community. Additionally, the use of natural gas-powered vehicles in the terminals and the electrification of docking facilities to provide power for steamships, which would otherwise be burning bunker fuel, exemplify the kinds of measures that have reinforced the commitment concerning environmental mitigation. Future competitive shipping practices may require offering more liquid natural gas services to supplement shoreside electrification. Regarding the ground transportation front, significant efforts to expand on-dock rail service will pay competitive dividends to the ports of LA and Long Beach while eliminating numerous truck trips. The Alameda Corridor is viewed by many as a model of public-private transportation partnerships, and also the best method for expediting discretionary cargo to distant locations with the least impact on local streets, roads, and highways. Ultimately, all future trends in trade will affect the ports of LA and Long Beach. Already, larger ships are beginning to berth in the harbor on a regular basis. The massive 12,000 TEU ships seen today may be replaced by 18,000 TEU megaships within a few years. With larger ships and consolidated cargo runs, harbor calls may become somewhat less frequent. However, the resulting surges in cargo containers could make congestion in the marine terminals more apparent, especially if several ships arrive at the same time. Bottlenecks in getting the containers out of the gates and onto the existing roadways in a reasonable time frame may become another major issue. Less efficient use of port facilities and surface infrastructure, leading to delayed warehouse deliveries, could influence higher inventory costs. The community is certain to notice an uptick in truck traffic when these 18,000 TEU surges occur.
Efficiency is the most important thing right now. And the reason is the carriers have invested in big ships. And they make money when those ships are at sea, not when they're sitting in port. So if you've made an investment in a big ship and you've achieved that economy of scale, you don't want to lose those savings by having the ship sit at the port longer than it needs to. You're going to want to make sure you bring that ship to a terminal that can perform at a certain efficiency level. And that is why there's a lot of focus now on the terminals in terms of improving efficiencies. And with the carriers forming alliances, they have a lot of bargaining clout, a lot of clout in kind of pushing the terminals to achieve those performance levels.
In spite of any potential cargo surges, the megaships would seem to provide a competitive advantage for the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach because of the deep harbors there and the enormous crane facilities capable of servicing the container volume. Few facilities in the U.S. have the capacity to effectively handle such large ships on a regular basis. But shippers will be reluctant to send goods through Southern California if political and community opposition make it difficult to move cargo quickly through the system. Near-term 24-hour operations have been suggested by some as a strategy to attract and service more goods in an already well-equipped infrastructure. On the surface, this would appear to provide more job opportunities. Yet, the tide of technology is turning toward automation to provide more productivity while also lowering costs over time. It appears certain that both bigger ships will arrive and more automation will be implemented.
The Port of LA and Long Beach has the deep waters. They have great terminals. The infrastructure is being invested in heavily. They got great rail lines. We got the highways, the freeways, and so forth. So we're positioned well, logistically speaking, compared to anywhere else on the West Coast. So we're in a good place. The reality is that 70% of our cargo probably is going to come through this port no matter what because of how close it is to where it has to be delivered. 30% or maybe a little more is really the real discretionary cargo that we're going to have to compete for with Prince Rupert, with Mexico, with other. But our competition will not be any other port on the West Coast other than maybe Prince Rupert. And, you know, Prince Rupert has 4 cranes. They may expand to 8 cranes, you know.
Because of an aging society and widening gaps of income distribution, the consumer market in the U.S. is maturing. That means the growth rate of imports is likely to slow or decline in future years. Average household income in America has remained relatively flat for 6 years, following the Great Recession beginning in 2008. Very slow growth in disposable income and a stubborn and often stagnant job market with highly stratified occupational opportunities have taken a toll on the typical middle-class consumer. Rents are rising in major cities faster than household incomes are expanding. Population growth has mostly leveled off in the U.S., meaning that overall demand-driven consumer activity will not take great leaps forward in the near future. Large consumer markets will propagate in nations where major development is either taking root or beginning to flourish. In addition to China, India would fall into this category, as could Brazil and possibly Indonesia. Long-term, there may be possibilities in South Africa and other African nations such as Kenya. Turkey remains the brightest hope for a burgeoning consumer market in the Middle East, largely because of its relative stability, openness to the West, large population, and vibrant economy. Development of new technologies and new forms of resource acquisition in just a few short years have placed the United States in a much more competitive position on the energy front. These new technologies make it conceivable to start thinking about bringing some manufacturing back to the USA because of a lower cost of more abundant energy closer to home. Manufacturing and processing thrive on low-cost energy, in addition to low-cost labor and materials. Should this homegrown energy begin to fuel more U.S. production work, it would likely have some impact on the amount of importing and exporting done through the West Coast. At present, the full impact of more abundant, cheaper energy on a large scale is yet to be determined.
I see the U.S. system as becoming, it already is the largest, but the most diverse energy system. And it's that diversification that should be viewed very positively. Creating more electricity with renewables is good. Producing more oil and gas and using it for industrial manufacturing or making exports is good. Those are all good. I guess my view is the diversification and growth of all forms of energy for the U.S. is a good thing, because if you don't use it all, other people will, and you can export it.
Perhaps the most important factor for future economic growth and trade patterns will be the formation of various trade and shipping alliances. The European Union is America's #1 trading partner, followed by China. However, China is busy shoring up alliances with its other East Asian neighbors and has made strong inroads into Africa and the Middle East, involving extensive oil contracts with countries like Iraq and Algeria, as well as Angola, Sudan, and Nigeria. South American countries entered a union of South American nations known as UNASUR in 2008. How these and other trade relationships play out will have influence on where products and commodities ebb and flow. Regarding shipping alliances, 11 ocean carriers have banded together in groups of 5 and 6 companies in 2 separate corporate linkages. These 2 alliances are consolidating cargo containers on ships and routes, ultimately garnering greater combined efficiency and cost control advantages. The now abandoned P3 shipping consortium was rejected by Chinese regulators because of concerns about antitrust issues and unfair competition. The P3 would have included the 3 powerhouse European-based companies of French CMA CGM, Danish Maersk, and Swiss MSC. As an alliance, the P3 would have controlled 43% of the Asia to Europe market, 41% of transatlantic routes, and about 24% of the trans-Pacific market. In the final analysis, The wealth of nations today depends upon the flexibility of those countries to adapt to the changing circumstances of the global economy, including, number one, the chase for the cheapest manufacturing costs. Number two, the implementation of environmental standards. Number three, the ability to provide high-quality services and innovation. Number four, the stability of political institutions. And number five, the access to abundant energy supplies. All of these considerations will have great bearing on who wins and who loses in the future. Another way of perceiving that critical combination is to think of quality, cost, convenience, and consistency as the four cornerstones of success. If the goods movement industry in Southern California can place those cornerstones at the base of operations, then tomorrow can be bright. Opportunities exist in Southern California because of a large consumer market and a highly developed modern infrastructure combined with technical expertise and year-round good weather. Barriers to future trade growth include potential congestion, environmental concerns, community opposition, and competition for the most cost-efficient routes to the eastern half of the nation. The future belongs to those who can see it and then plan appropriately for it.